Imagine lying in bed, frozen in the dead of night, as an invisible force grips you tightly, paralyzing every inch of your body. This is exactly what our protagonist experienced, a night of terror so vivid, it defies explanation and logic. Open the story with an ominous tone, setting the expectation that this is no ordinary story. Explain that it's not a tale of imagination or fiction. This is a first-hand encounter, a story shared by someone who lived through the horrors of an unexplained presence in a setting where they should have felt safe. The protagonist recalls the unsettling routine of sharing a small, cramped room with her brother at their grandmother's house, a place that always seemed to hold whispers and shadows. At first, she felt only slight unease, brushing it off as part of being in a dark, unfamiliar room. But one fateful night, as everyone else lay sound asleep, she would come face to face with something unimaginable. She didn't know it yet, but this night would forever change the way she felt about the dark and about the safety of her own bed. Invite viewers deeper into this disturbing story with the promise that it will haunt their thoughts long after the video ends. Say, this isn't just another ghost story. It's a chilling account of a force that lurks just beyond our senses, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Make it clear that this story is about experiencing the unknown in its rawest form, a terror that could reach anyone, even in the most ordinary places. Encourage them to watch until the very end, warning, this story may make you question what you feel in the quiet of the night. Hit the like button, share this story with anyone who enjoys true tales of the supernatural, and subscribe to Sinister Stories for more unnerving accounts that expose the dark side of reality. The story unfolds in a quiet, secluded room at the back of an old house, a modest, shadowed home belonging to the protagonist's grandmother. Although familiar, the house has always been shrouded in an eerie silence that hangs heavily, especially at night. This room, shared with her brother, seems frozen in time, like a forgotten relic. The walls are thin, weathered, and covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, adding to the sense of abandonment that clings to every corner. The floorboards creak with the slightest movement, almost as if they hold the memories of all those who have passed through, and the single, dim light bulb barely fights off the darkness, leaving deep, unsettling shadows that dance around the room's edges. Outside the small, narrow window, there's nothing but the faint outline of an overgrown garden, tangled and wild, casting strange shapes against the window pane whenever the wind stirs the bushes. Beyond it lies only darkness, vast and impenetrable, as if the room exists in a world all its own, detached from the rest of reality. On moonless nights, the room feels like an isolated island swallowed by shadow. Every sound, every creak, seems amplified in the quiet, creating an atmosphere thick with the feeling that something unseen is lurking just out of sight. As the protagonist prepares to sleep, an uneasy feeling fills the room, pressing in like an invisible weight. She lies on the bed beside her brother, who's already lost in a deep, undisturbed sleep. But something feels wrong, something that she can't quite name. There's a chill in the air that seems unnatural, creeping through the walls, sending a shiver down her spine. The silence isn't comforting. It's oppressive, as if it's waiting, poised to break at any moment. She tries to ignore it, pulling the covers tightly around her, but the sense of being watched grows stronger, like eyes pressing against her back from somewhere in the dark. The room itself feels alive, filled with shadows that seem to stretch and shift with every flicker of the dim light. It's the kind of darkness that feels thick, almost tangible, as if it could swallow anyone who dares to step out of the bed. Outside, a faint rustling comes from the garden, scratching against the window, almost like fingers tapping, impatient and insistent. But when she looks, there's nothing there, just the empty, black void beyond the glass. In this sinister silence, every sense is heightened. She can hear her own heartbeat echoing in her chest, feel the weight of her own breath as it catches in her throat. It's a room where nightmares feel at home, where the ordinary takes on a sinister edge. The air seems to pulse with anticipation, as if something is on the verge of making itself known. And in that moment, she knows she is not alone. The stage is set for something unspeakable to emerge from the shadows. The first signs of terror begin subtly, creeping in like shadows stretching under a faint light. As the protagonist lies in bed, she suddenly becomes aware of an unnatural chill spreading through the room. It isn't just a cold breeze. It's an iciness that settles into her bones, like an invisible hand brushing against her skin. She pulls her covers tighter, trying to shake off the feeling, but an eerie sensation begins to crawl over her, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on her chest, as if something unseen is lurking nearby, watching, waiting. The darkness feels alive, a silent observer just out of reach, and she can't shake the feeling of being exposed and vulnerable, even with her brother sleeping mere inches away. Then, just as she begins to dismiss her unease as a trick of her imagination, a faint, barely perceptible noise cuts through the silence. It's not the familiar creaks of the old house settling. It's something else, a strange, rhythmic sound, like slow, deliberate footsteps. The sound seems to rise from nowhere, moving closer, yet there's no one else in the room. Her heart races, each beat echoing louder in her ears, and she holds her breath, straining to listen. But as the sound draws nearer, she realizes it isn't coming from the hallway. It's inside the room. The footsteps stop, and the silence that follows is even more terrifying. Her senses are on high alert, every nerve in her body taut, as she waits for something to happen. And then, without warning, she feels a sudden, sharp tug at her long hair. It's not gentle, like the accidental brush of a hand. It's forceful, almost angry, as if something is deliberately trying to pull her, to hold her down. Panic floods her mind as she tries to move, to sit up, but her body won't respond. She's paralyzed, trapped in place, her breathing quickening as an invisible grip tightens around her. The tugging continues, relentless and insistent, and then a hand, cold, heavy, unnatural, clamps over her mouth, silencing her screams before they even have a chance to escape. She can't move, can't breathe, the weight of terror pressing down on her like a lead blanket. Her brother remains in deep sleep beside her, blissfully unaware of the nightmare unfolding just inches away. Her mind races in silent horror as she tries to free herself, to scream, but the force holding her down seems stronger, more determined with each passing second. The room, once filled with shadows, now feels like it's closing in, trapping her in this nightmare. Every second stretches into an eternity as she struggles against the unseen entity, her thoughts a panicked blur. She can feel its cold, unyielding grip on her hair, its fingers pressing against her mouth with an almost inhuman strength, muffling her breath and intensifying the claustrophobic fear that she may never escape. In that moment, she realizes this is no dream, no fleeting illusion. She is at the mercy of something beyond human understanding, and it is far from merciful. The terror, raw and consuming, leaves her paralyzed, her only hope the distant prayer that somehow this nightmare will end. As the night drags on, the protagonist finds herself torn between a primal urge to flee and an equally powerful need to understand what's tormenting her. Her mind races as the fear settles into something deeper, something that roots itself in the pit of her stomach. The unseen force has left her shaken, but a nagging, dark curiosity gnaws at her thoughts. She knows she should stay silent, keep her eyes shut, pretend this was all a nightmare, but the oppressive energy in the room is palpable, demanding her attention, almost as if it's calling her. Every instinct tells her to remain still, to ignore it, but there's an almost magnetic pull to confront whatever malevolent presence lingers in the shadows. Taking a shaky breath, she slowly opens her eyes, peering into the darkness that now feels thick, alive, watching her every move. Her heart pounds furiously, a deafening drumbeat in the silent room, as she scans for any sign of movement. The darkness seems to swallow her gaze, but then a flicker. A shadow shifts just beyond her line of sight, a shape that shouldn't be there, hovering near the foot of her bed. She freezes, muscles tense, debating whether to pull the covers over her head like a child or sit up to confront whatever is there. The desire to look, to know, wars with the suffocating fear that whatever is lurking may not want to be seen. Her mind spins with questions and the torturous uncertainty of what awaits. She can feel her body reacting, every nerve on edge, yet a grim determination rises within her. She decides to confront it, to see, even if it's the last thing she ever does. She begins to move, inching up on the bed, her eyes adjusting to the low light. Shadows blur and sharpen as she catches a faint glint near her feet, something vaguely reflective like a distant, cold eye watching her from the darkness. Her breath catches, her skin prickling with dread, as she realizes she is no longer alone in the room. Summoning every ounce of courage, she sits up fully, heart hammering so loudly that she wonders if it will give her away. She tries to focus, her gaze fixed on the shifting shadows, searching for any movement. And then she sees it, the unmistakable outline of a figure, standing unnaturally still at the edge of the room, cloaked in shadow, its form just barely discernible, but undeniably there. Panic seizes her, yet she can't look away. The figure doesn't move, doesn't speak, and yet its very presence exudes a dark, chilling energy, as if it's waiting for her to make a move, to challenge it. The internal conflict reaches a fever pitch, an agonizing push and pull between fear and an inexplicable drive to face whatever this entity is. She is caught in a terrible moment of indecision, fully aware that whatever she chooses may define her fate. Her mind races with 1,000 thoughts. What does it want? Has it been here before, lurking silently in the corners of her life? Or is this the first, final time it will make itself known? She realizes that if she dares to confront it, she may be stepping into a realm from which she may never return. And yet, something compels her forward, drawing her into a decision that will either be her salvation or her undoing. The moment of confrontation unfolds like a nightmare coming to life. The darkness that once hovered at the edges of her vision now gathers and solidifies, manifesting into a looming figure at the foot of her bed. Her breath catches in her throat as she locks eyes, or rather, empty, dark voids, with this presence. It's close enough that she can make out details she wishes she hadn't seen. The unnatural thinness of its form, limbs that stretch too long and end in claw-like fingers, and a face that's both devoid of expression yet somehow filled with a dreadful intent. The very air around her seems to thicken, pressing down on her chest, making each breath feel shallow, labored, as if the creature itself is feeding on her fear. Paralyzed by terror, she can only watch as it begins to move, each step slow and deliberate, almost mocking in its approach. There's a twisted rhythm in its movement, as if it's taunting her, savoring the agony etched across her face. The air grows colder still, and a faint, sickly sweet scent fills her nostrils, making her stomach churn, a smell like decayed flowers mingling with something metallic, something close to blood. She wants to scream, to shake her brother awake, but her voice betrays her, swallowed by the paralyzing weight of the creature's presence. As the entity approaches, she feels a strange pressure building in her mind, an intruding force that presses into her thoughts, pushing against her memories, as if it's searching for something deeply personal, something it can exploit. Its eyeless gaze seems to reach into her, plucking out moments of vulnerability, fears she thought long buried, and she realizes with mounting dread that this being is no stranger to her. It knows her in ways no one else does. It's been watching, perhaps even waiting, silently lurking just beyond the veil of reality, biding its time for the perfect moment to reveal itself. The figure reaches the side of her bed, its towering frame bending, folding impossibly, until it's mere inches from her face. She can feel the chill radiating from it, an unnatural cold that seems to suck the warmth from her very bones. It raises a hand, skeletal and grotesque, and with agonizing slowness, stretches a finger toward her, brushing her forehead with a touch so frigid it burns. A sharp, blinding pain sears through her mind, like ice spreading through her veins, and a vision flashes before her eyes, a memory she doesn't recognize, of someone else, a figure similar to hers, trapped in this same room, under the same agonizing touch. This horrifying glimpse confirms her deepest fear. This entity is not bound by time. It has haunted this house, this room, for generations, claiming those unfortunate enough to cross its path. She is not its first victim, and something within her whispers she won't be the last. The creature's face, or lack of one, tilts, almost as if it senses her realization, and a low, guttural noise fills the room, an unholy sound that's neither a laugh nor a growl, but something far worse, a sound that conveys pleasure in her terror. Finally, with one last chilling caress, the creature releases her, retracting its hand with deliberate reluctance. Her muscles, locked in terror for so long, begin to spasm, releasing the scream that had been trapped in her throat, a blood-curdling sound that shatters the silence and jolts her brother awake. But as she looks back, eyes wild, the creature has already faded into the shadows, leaving only the suffocating emptiness in its wake. She's left with a raw, gutted feeling of horror, knowing that this encounter was only a glimpse of what this entity is capable of, and that it may return, whenever it chooses, to reclaim her fear as its own. In the throes of terror, she finally glimpses the truth behind her torment, an agonizing, horrifying realization that roots her in place. As she stares, heart racing, the figure begins to shift, moving with an unnatural slowness, almost as if savoring each second of her mounting fear. What had once seemed like an indistinct shadow now takes form, revealing a twisted semblance of something almost human, but wrong in every conceivable way. Its limbs are elongated, moving with a sickening, puppet-like jerkiness, and its face, if it could even be called that, is a pale, featureless void, save for two empty sockets where eyes should be. The absence of a mouth or nose makes it all the more monstrous, as if it has been stripped of any semblance of humanity. A low, humming vibration fills the air, a sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She realizes, with a sickening certainty, that this being isn't just here to scare her. It's something older, something that feeds on fear itself, lurking in the shadows of this house for generations. Her grandmother's home, which had once been a sanctuary, now reveals itself as a vessel, a place that holds this entity, allowing it to slowly grow stronger with each terrified heartbeat. She tries to rationalize, to grasp some logic, but the terror overpowers her thoughts, leaving only the primal need to survive. Then, as if sensing her terror peaking, the entity tilts its head, a subtle yet menacing gesture, acknowledging her. And in that instant she understands. It's not here by accident. This is no random haunting. She is its chosen prey. An image flickers in her mind, as if planted there by the creature itself. Children and adults, all generations of her family, standing in this very room, caught in its gaze, each face twisted in fear. She realizes that it has been waiting, watching, growing hungrier with each encounter. This revelation sends a wave of horror crashing over her, knowing she is merely the latest in a line of victims, each one offering their fear to this unholy presence. As the creature draws closer, its movements slow and deliberate, she can feel her mind beginning to slip, torn between the unbearable truth and her urge to run. She grasps at memories, happy ones, fragments of her life before this night, before the darkness became something alive and hostile. But even these memories begin to fade, swallowed by the oppressive presence that seeps into every corner of her mind. The room around her, once familiar, now feels foreign and hostile, the very air thick with the malevolence of this ancient, timeless predator. In a final, harrowing moment, she sees the creature reach out, its fingers elongated, pointed, and impossibly cold as they brush against her cheek. It's as though it's marking her, binding her fate to its own, a silent claim of ownership. The shock and horror of this revelation crashes down on her, a tidal wave of despair mixed with the undeniable knowledge that she will never truly be free. She is bound to this house, to this creature, and even if she escapes tonight, The encounter has left its mark, something that will follow her, linger in her shadow, and haunt her dreams. The horror is far from over, and she knows, with chilling certainty, that this revelation is only the beginning. As dawn begins to break, a pale light seeps into the room, washing over her surroundings and dissolving the shadows, but it brings no comfort. She sits motionless on her bed, heart still racing, as if the creature's cold grip lingers on her skin. Her brother is awake now, looking at her with confusion and concern, but she can barely muster the words to explain. How could she make him understand the horror she had faced, something lurking beyond reason or belief? The memory of the creature's touch burns in her mind, a phantom chill that reminds her it could return at any time. She's left questioning her own reality, wondering if the darkness she experienced was real or some twisted nightmare that has forever stained her sense of safety. In the days that follow, the experience clings to her, a shadow that never truly fades. The room, once a familiar place of comfort, has transformed into a realm of lurking dread, haunted by the knowledge of what she encountered. Each night, as darkness falls, her fear rises, a suffocating weight that keeps her awake long after the house has gone silent. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the window, fills her with a raw, primal terror, as if the creature is just waiting for the perfect moment to return. She begins to notice things she'd once ignored, a chill that lingers in certain corners, faint shadows that flicker across the walls even when there's no one else around. The house itself feels tainted, as if the entity's presence has soaked into the very walls. Her family notices the change in her demeanor. She's jumpy, anxious, always glancing over her shoulder, even in daylight. They chalk it up to bad dreams, the product of an overactive imagination, but she knows the truth. The creature was real, and it had left a mark on her mind, a scar that no amount of reassurance could heal. She considers telling them everything, but the words feel hollow, inadequate to convey the depth of terror she experienced. They wouldn't understand, not until they, too, felt the icy touch of something from beyond reality. Sleep becomes a distant memory, and when she does manage to drift off, she's haunted by dreams of the creature standing by her bed, silent and waiting, its eyeless face observing her with a chilling, inhuman patience. In these nightmares, she can feel it reaching out to her, its fingers grazing her skin, each touch like a reminder that she can never truly escape. And though she wakes up each morning, drenched in sweat, her pulse racing, there's a part of her that can't shake the feeling that the creature is still there, lingering in the corners, watching and waiting for the right moment to pull her back into its grasp. The story doesn't end with her encounter. It's as though the creature has claimed a piece of her, leaving her forever tethered to that night. She becomes increasingly reclusive, her once joyful demeanor replaced with a hollow, haunted look. The world around her fades, replaced by an endless fear of the darkness, of shadows that stretch too long, of rooms where the air feels too thick. And each night, as she lies awake in that room, listening to the silence, she knows that the creature is still with her, just beyond the veil of reality, waiting patiently for the day when it will reach out once more. In the final moments of the story, she gazes into the darkness of the room, feeling the oppressive presence as though it's standing beside her once again. The knowledge that it could come back at any time, that her fear will forever be its invitation, leaves her paralyzed. She is a prisoner of her own terror, bound to a cycle of sleepless nights and haunted days, knowing that the horror will persist, lingering in the shadows long after she's gone. As the screen fades to black, a single message lingers. Some nightmares never end. Weeks have passed since that night, yet the terror has not released her. The memory of the creature clings to her mind, a dark stain that refuses to fade. She has tried to return to her life, forcing herself through the motions of normalcy, but something within her has irrevocably changed. The world now seems veiled in shadows, as if the boundary between reality and nightmare has thinned, leaving her perpetually teetering on the edge of both. Each morning brings a fleeting sense of relief as daylight seeps in, but it is always hollow, tainted by the knowledge that night will inevitably return. And with it, perhaps, the creature. Friends and family have noticed the change, the way her laughter has quieted, her gaze distant and haunted. She is often caught staring into darkened spaces, flinching at subtle sounds, or pulling away from the comforting touch of loved ones. They try to reassure her, insisting that whatever happened was merely a bad dream, a shadow of her imagination. But they weren't there. They didn't feel the icy, invasive touch of that entity, the suffocating grip of pure, unspeakable evil. She carries this knowledge alone, a secret burden that no one else could understand, a horror that has taken root in her very soul. At night, sleep is a battle she rarely wins. She lies in bed, eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling, listening to every creak and whisper of the house as though it's alive, hiding secrets in its dark corners. Shadows seem to stretch and shift in unnatural ways, taking on shapes that remind her of that ghastly figure, taunting her with the memory of its empty, eyeless stare. She begins to see it in her peripheral vision, just outside the edges of light, a flicker of movement that vanishes the moment she turns to look. It's as though the creature has become a part of her reality, forever lurking, watching, and waiting. One night, as she sits alone, trembling in the stillness, she feels compelled to reach out, hoping that speaking her experience aloud might somehow break its hold. But as she tries to recount the encounter, words fail her. The terror is too vast, too incomprehensible, to be contained in language. She realizes with a sense of dread that her silence has become a form of submission, an acknowledgement that this entity now holds power over her, a power that goes beyond words, beyond logic, beyond reality itself. A chilling thought begins to take root. What if the creature isn't simply a presence confined to that room or that night? What if it has followed her, bound to her by the fear it instilled? She feels it in her dreams, in the weight that settles over her chest in dark, quiet moments, in the way the shadows seem to reach for her whenever she's alone. She is no longer sure where her fear ends and the creature begins, and a horrifying suspicion arises that she has somehow become a vessel for its darkness, a beacon for its return. In the final scenes, she stares into a mirror, trying to find some trace of her former self. But the face looking back at her is a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, marked by an eternal, lingering dread. She touches her cheek, feeling the ghostly chill of the creature's touch still lingering there. She realizes, with a dawning sense of helplessness, that the experience has left a permanent scar, an invisible brand that has marked her as the creature's own. No matter where she goes, she is haunted by the knowledge that it may return at any moment, slipping out from the shadows to reclaim the fear that sustains it. As she walks away from the mirror, her gaze drifts to the dark corners of the room, her heart pounding in anticipation of something she knows may never truly go away. The video ends with an eerie silence, leaving viewers with the impression that her terror isn't confined to the story. It's an ongoing, relentless nightmare that follows her, even in the light. And as the screen fades, a final message appears, urging the audience to share their own encounters with the unknown and subscribe to Sinister Stories, a reminder that, in the end, some horrors are never fully left behind.